The council chamber fell silent as another red marker appeared on the holographic star map. That made 43 worlds lost in just 3 cycles. Ambassador watched the crimson spread across their territory like a disease. His blue skin had lost its usual vibrant glow, dulled by exhaustion and fear. "How many civilians did we evacuate from?" asked Council Prime, her voice barely above a whisper. "Only 30%, replied. His 4 arms hung limp at his sides. "The swarm moved faster than our projections. They always move faster." Around the circular chamber, representatives from 7 different species sat in their designated seats. The coalition had existed for 2,000 cycles, built on principles of peace, trade, and mutual cooperation. Their combined fleets had been designed to stop pirates and settle minor disputes between colonies. They had never prepared for total war. The swarm had changed everything. They had appeared from the dark spaces between stars 6 cycles ago. Nobody knew where they came from or what they wanted. The swarm did not communicate. They did not negotiate. They simply consumed. World after world fell to their endless numbers. Billions of lives had been extinguished, turned into biomass to fuel the swarm's expansion. "Our defense fleets are requesting reinforcements at the line," reported military coordinator. His form clicked nervously as he spoke. "But we have no reinforcements to send. Every ship we have is already deployed." "What about the new weapon systems from the scientists?" someone asked. Santini drooped. "Ineffective. The swarm adapts too quickly. Weapons that worked last cycle are useless now." Moved to the center of the chamber, his reflection distorted in the polished floor. "We are losing this war. Our military doctrine was never designed for an enemy like this. We train our soldiers to protect, not to kill with efficiency. We build our ships for exploration and defense, not for destruction." "What are you suggesting?" asked. "I am suggesting we face the truth. In another 10 cycles, maybe 15 if we are fortunate, the coalition will cease to exist. The swarm will consume every world we hold." The chamber erupted in protest. Voices overlapped in a dozen different languages, all saying the same thing. They could not give up. They had to keep fighting. They had to protect their people. Raised all 4 arms, calling for silence. "I am not suggesting surrender. I am suggesting we use Protocol 7. The chamber went deathly quiet. Protocol 7 was ancient, established when the coalition first formed. It was a last resort, meant for extinction-level threats. It had never been activated in 2,000 cycles of peace. "Protocol 7 requires unanimous consent," said slowly. "You understand what you are asking. We would be broadcasting our location, our weakness, to every species in the galaxy. We would be begging strangers for help." "Yes," said simply. "We would be begging because the alternative is death." One by one, the council members voted. Some quickly, others after long moments of internal struggle. But the fear was too great, the stakes too high. When the final vote was cast, it was unanimous. The transmission was prepared carefully. It contained everything: their location, their situation, the nature of the threat, and a desperate plea for military assistance. The coalition's most powerful communication array sent the message in every direction, across thousands of light years, in every language their computers could generate. Then they waited. Days passed, the swarm advanced. The line fell, and with it, 6 more worlds. The council met in emergency sessions, arguing about evacuation routes and fallback positions. Nobody mentioned the transmission. Nobody wanted to admit they had pinned their hopes on silence. Then on the 8th day, a response arrived. Was in his quarters, staring at casualty reports he could no longer bear to read, when his communication device chirped. He almost ignored it, but something made him look. The message was short, just one line imperfectly translated: "Hold position. Humanity is coming." He read it 3 times before his hands started shaking. He immediately called an emergency council session. Humanity asked, studying the message data. Our archives show no record of this species. Where did this transmission originate? The communications officer, a young named, worked frantically at his console. The signal is extremely powerful. It came from coordinates marked. A small yellow star in an outer spiral arm. The system is listed in our charts as uninhabited. Scan the historical surveys, ordered. The last survey was 900 cycles ago, reported. It noted no advanced life, just one world in the habitable zone with primitive carbon-based organisms. Then how did they begin? They developed in 900 cycles, finished. His mind raced. That was impossibly fast. Most species took 3,000 cycles or more to reach the stars. What should we respond? Asked. Thought carefully. Send our coordinates, tell them where we need help most urgently, and, he hesitated, ask what forces they can commit. The response came within hours. It was longer this time, more detailed, but one section made blood run cold. 3 warships departing immediately. Estimated arrival, 4 cycles. Crew complement, 1,200 personnel. Armament specifications attached. Humanity has received your distress call and considers this an act of first contact. We will help. Opened the armament specifications and went very pale. Council Prime, you should see this. The holographic display showed weapons systems unlike anything in Coalition databases. Kinetic bombardment systems capable of cracking planetary crusts. Thermonuclear devices measured in hundreds of megatons. Directed energy weapons that could boil oceans. Chemical and biological weapons marked with warning symbols they did not recognize. This cannot be correct, whispered. These are instruments of planetary destruction, not military defense. Stared at the specifications, a terrible understanding dawning. They said 3 warships, just 3. Either they are fools who do not understand the scale of the threat. He paused, his voice dropping. Or they believe 3 ships are enough. What kind of species builds weapons like this? Asked. Nobody answered. They simply waited, hoping they had not made a terrible mistake. They had begged the stars for help. The stars had answered. Now they would see what kind of monsters answered desperate prayers. The swarm continued to advance. The coalition continued to fall back, buying time. And somewhere in the dark between stars, humanity was coming. The space station orbiting Tals was the largest structure the coalition had ever built. It served as a diplomatic hub, a research center, and now, a meeting place for first contact with humanity. Stood in the observation deck, watching 3 ships emerge from faster-than-light travel. They were smaller than he expected. Coalition vessels were massive, designed to carry thousands of personnel in comfort for long voyages. These human ships were compact, angular, covered in dark armor plating. They moved with precise efficiency, taking up formation around the station without any wasted motion. They are requesting docking permission, reported from the communications station. Grant it, said. She stood beside, her ceremonial robes immaculate despite the circumstances. Let us meet our saviors or our doom. The docking bay was filled with coalition personnel. Scientists, military officers, diplomats, all waiting to see what humans looked like. Security teams stood ready, though had ordered them to keep weapons hidden. The massive airlock cycled, equalizing pressure, and the doors slid open. The first human through the door made several council members step back instinctively. He was tall, perhaps 6.5 feet by coalition measurements. His body was lean but obviously muscled beneath a dark uniform. His skin was a light tan color, his hair black and cut very short, but it was his eyes that made uneasy. They were positioned on the front of his face, not the sides like most species. Predator eyes, designed for tracking prey. I am captain of the Earth Defense Forces, the human said. His voice was deep and steady. Thank you for your hospitality. Noticed a scar running from his left eye down to his jaw, a warrior's mark. We are grateful for your response, Captain. I am ambassador of the coalition. More humans filed into the bay. Counted 40 personnel, all moving with the same efficient precision as their ships. They all had those forward-facing eyes, scanning the room constantly, evaluating. Behind them, a woman with long dark hair pulled back in a practical style stepped forward. "This is Doctor, our and cultural liaison," said. Smile was warm, but noticed her eyes were just as sharp as, "We are honored to meet you. First contact is always significant." "Indeed," said, "though we wish it were under better circumstances. Perhaps we should move to a conference room." The briefing took 3 hours. The coalition presented everything they knew about the swarm. Attack patterns, fleet compositions, casualty estimates, projected timelines for total collapse. And his officers listened in silence, occasionally asking pointed questions. When it was finished, sat back in his chair. "You have been fighting defensively." "We are a peacekeeping force," explained. "We protect our borders, evacuate civilians, attempt to minimize casualties." "That is why you are losing," said a human officer sitting next to. His nameplate read Lieutenant Minu. His face was expressionless, his tone matter-of-fact. "The swarm does not care about its casualties. It only cares about consumption. You cannot defeat an enemy that values nothing." "We value life," said stiffly. "All life, that is what makes us civilized." Doctor leaned forward, her expression sympathetic. "I understand your position, truly, but I need to explain something about humans. Our world, Earth, is classified as a Class 12 death world." "Death world?" asked. "It means nearly everything on our planet evolved to kill or avoid being killed. We have predators that hunt in packs with coordinated strategies. We have prey animals that can run for days without stopping. We have plants that produce poisons, insects that inject venom, microorganisms that cause deadly diseases. Earth is a nightmare by most galactic standards." Pulled up a holographic display showing images of Earth. Beautiful oceans and green continents, but the images that followed told a different story. Massive carnivores with dagger teeth, tiny spiders whose bite caused necrosis, storms that could level entire cities, volcanic eruptions, tsunamis, earthquakes. "Humans evolved as persistence hunters," continued. "We would chase prey for hours, sometimes days, until it collapsed from exhaustion. We learned to cooperate, to plan, to use tools, and we learned to kill efficiently. We also learned to kill each other," added quietly. "Our species has been at war for most of our history. We have refined violence into an art form." One of his officers, a woman with short hair named Engineer, activated another display. It showed human military history. Primitive clubs and spears gave way to swords and bows. Then came gunpowder, cannons, firearms, tanks and aircraft, nuclear weapons, orbital bombardment systems. "You have used nuclear weapons?" asked, horrified. "On your own world?" "Twice," said. "In our World War II, we killed hundreds of thousands in seconds. It was necessary to end a conflict that had already killed tens of millions." The coalition representative sat in shocked silence. "I think you are trying to frighten us," said finally. "No," replied. "We are trying to be honest. You need to understand what kind of help you asked for. Humans are predators. We are violent. We have created weapons that can sterilize planets. We have doctrines for acceptable casualty rates. We have terms like collateral damage and strategic bombing and scorched earth." "Then you are monsters," whispered. His expression softened. "We can be, but we are also capable of great compassion and self-sacrifice. Humans have died by the millions to protect strangers. We have entire philosophies built around the value of life and dignity. We are contradictions, Council Prime. We are both the monster and the hero in our own stories." "I do not understand," said. Lieutenant Minu stood. "Perhaps a demonstration would help. Do you have combat simulation facilities?" They did. The Coalition used them for training peacekeepers. Minyu entered the simulation alone, while the others watched from an observation room. The scenario was simple: a standard urban pacification mission with hostile targets and civilians mixed together. What happened next made understand the difference between Coalition peacekeepers and human soldiers. Minyu moved through the simulation like liquid death. He used cover perfectly, never exposing himself unnecessarily. He eliminated hostile targets with precise shots, 2 to the center of mass, 1 to the head. He used grenades to flush enemies from cover, then cut them down in crossfire. He moved civilians out of danger zones with efficient commands. The simulation that usually took Coalition trainees 30 minutes to complete, Minyu finished in 4. His accuracy rate is 97%, reported, his voice shaking. 0 civilian casualties, 23 hostile targets neutralized. Run it again, said, higher difficulty. They ran 6 more simulations, each one increasing in complexity and danger. Minyu's performance never wavered. When he finally exited, he was not even breathing hard. You fight like a machine, said. No, Minyu replied. Machines do not adapt. I fight like a human who has trained for war since childhood. Every member of Earth's military has completed similar training. Turn to face the Coalition leaders directly. You asked if we can help you defeat the swarm. The answer is yes, but you need to understand the cost. We will fight with every weapon at our disposal. We will employ tactics you consider brutal. We will accept casualties you find unacceptable. And in the end, we will win because humans are very good at one thing: surviving against impossible odds. We have fought worse on our own world, added. The swarm is just another threat, another problem to solve with violence. Felt something cold settle in his chest. They had called out to the stars for help. The stars had sent them apex predators wrapped in the guise of civilization. What do you need from us? He asked quietly. Complete intelligence on the swarm, said. Fleet positions, logistics, supply lines. And then you need to trust us to do what we do best. Which is? Smile was grim. War ambassador, humanity has never lost at war. The swarm moved like a living tide across the system. Billions of organisms, ranging from small fighter-sized creatures to massive the size of moons. They had consumed 3 worlds already in this sector. The Coalition fleet was in full retreat, desperately trying to evacuate the civilian population from Prime before the swarm arrived. Watched from the bridge of the Coalition flagship Bright Path as the human ships moved into position. 3 vessels against an enemy that numbered in the billions. It seemed like madness. Captain is requesting a tactical channel, reported the communications officer. Open it, ordered. His face appeared on the main screen. Behind him could see his bridge crew working with calm efficiency. Ambassador, we are ready to engage. How long until your evacuation is complete? 4 hours minimum, replied. Captain, there are too many. You need to fall back with us. 4 hours, repeated, ignoring the suggestion. We can buy you that time. Keep your ships focused on evacuation. Leave the swarm to us. How can 3 ships possibly? Trust us, said simply. Then the channel closed. The swarm advanced. The lead elements entered weapons range of the human ships, expected the humans to open fire immediately, but they held position, waiting. The swarm continued forward, confidence in their overwhelming numbers evident in their formation. Then the humans moved. The 3 ships broke formation simultaneously, accelerating to speeds that would have torn Coalition vessels apart. They wove through the swarm's lead elements, weapons systems lighting up space with sustained fire, but quickly realized they were not trying to destroy the swarm. They were hurting it. What are they doing? Asked, who had insisted on remaining on the bridge despite the danger. I do not know, admitted, but look at the swarm's formation. It is changing, compressing. The humans had positioned themselves in a triangle formation, driving the swarm into an increasingly tight corridor of space. They tried to break out, but every time they did, concentrated fire drove them back into the killing zone. Energy spike detected, the sensor officer reported. Origin point, by the ancestors, those are nuclear devices. The space where the humans had herded the swarm suddenly turned white. Not one nuclear explosion, but dozens. Perfectly positioned, perfectly timed. When the light faded, millions of swarm organisms were simply gone, vaporized in an instant. But the swarm adapted quickly. The remaining forces split into multiple groups, trying to surround the human ships. It should have worked, but the humans had already moved again. Captain's ship, the Indomitable, dove straight into the largest swarm concentration, watched in horror as thousands of swarm organisms swarmed around it. But then the Indomitable released something into the cloud of enemies. Gas, spores, whatever it was spread rapidly, and moments later, the swarm organisms began breaking apart, their biological matter dissolving. Chemical weapons, whispered. They are using chemical weapons. The second human ship, commanded by Lieutenant Minu, executed what the humans called a slash-and-burn maneuver. It accelerated through swarm formations, leaving behind a trail of explosive devices that detonated in sequence, creating a chain reaction of destruction. The precision was terrifying. Each explosion was calculated to drive swarm organisms into the next blast zone. The third ship, with engineer managing its weapons systems, demonstrated humanity's capacity for overwhelming firepower. It simply stationed itself at a strategic point and fired continuously. Kinetic rounds, energy beams, missiles, everything in its arsenal unleashed in a sustained barrage that created a wall of death no swarm organism could cross. Coalition fleet this is. We need ground support on Prime. Swarm landing pods have breached the outer defense grid. Felt his blood freeze. Captain, we have no ground forces there, only the evacuation teams. Then we are sending our own. On his tactical display, he watched as small craft launched from the Indomitable. Not standard shuttles, but armored drop pods designed to punch through atmosphere at terminal velocity. Inside those pods were human soldiers. One of them was Sergeant. The drop pods hit Prime's surface like meteors. His pods smashed through the roof of a manufacturing complex where swarm organisms were attacking trapped civilians. The impact alone killed a dozen swarm creatures, then emerged. The Coalition's observation drones captured everything. Watched, unable to look away, as his team moved through the facility. They were outnumbered 50-1, but they fought with a ferocity that made the swarm seem gentle by comparison. Used his environment like a weapon. He collapsed corridors to trap swarm organisms, then incinerated them with flamethrowers. He set ambushes using motion sensors and explosive charges. He even used swarm acid against them, collecting it in containers and throwing it at enemy clusters. His team moved like a single organism, communicating in short, efficient bursts. They covered each other's movements, exploited weaknesses, and showed absolutely no hesitation. When one soldier's rifle ran dry, he simply drew a knife and engaged the swarm in close combat until another teammate could provide covering fire. "They are going to die," said quietly, watching the tactical display. The swarm numbers were still overwhelming despite the humans' efforts, but had no intention of dying. He led his team and the rescued civilians to the facility's underground tunnels, then activated a remote device. The entire manufacturing complex exploded above them, collapsing on thousands of swarm organisms. The shockwave shook the ground for miles. Doctor's voice came over the fleet channel. She was coordinating human operations from the Bright Path, providing the Coalition with real-time analysis. Sergeant's team has secured Evacuation Corridor 7. 243 civilians are en route to the extraction point. At what cost? Asked. Paused. 30% casualties in unit. 12 dead, 6 critically wounded. 12 humans had died to save over 200 coalition civilians. Did not know how to process that. The battle raged for 4 hours. 4 hours of sustained, brutal combat. The human ships employed tactics that made coalition military doctrine seem naive. They used false retreats to lure swarm forces into trap zones. They targeted what the humans called supply lines, destroying swarm biofactories before they could produce reinforcements. They even used psychological warfare, broadcasting sounds and signals that seemed to confuse the swarm's coordination. When the evacuation was finally complete, gave the order to withdraw, but not before one final strike. The 3 human ships synchronized their weapons and fired on the ridge itself, the massive asteroid formation that gave the system its name. The ridge, weakened by precise targeting, broke apart. The debris field created a barrier between the swarm and the evacuating coalition fleet. Back on the bright path, reviewed the battle statistics with growing dread. The humans had destroyed approximately 15% of the swarm forces in the sector. Their ships were damaged, operating at reduced capacity. 30% of their personnel were casualties, many dead, others wounded so severely they would never fight again. But they had bought the coalition the time needed to evacuate 3 million civilians. Admiral, the coalition's highest military authority, summoned to a private meeting. The old warrior looked shaken. I have reviewed the human combat recordings. Ambassador, what have we invited into our space? Survivors, said quietly. We invited survivors. They fight without mercy, without hesitation. They use weapons we banned centuries ago because they were too terrible to contemplate. They sacrifice their own lives without pause. His voice dropped to a whisper. They are monsters. Yes, agreed, but they are our monsters now. In the medical bay, human and coalition medical personnel worked side by side to save the wounded. Medic moved between patients, her hands stained with blood of a dozen different colors. She worked on a human with a massive chest wound, then moved directly to a with severed limbs, treating both with the same desperate urgency. Sat in a corner, his armor scorched and cracked, holding the hand of a dying soldier. The man whispered something, nodded, promised something, then stayed there until the end. When entered the medical bay and saw this, she finally understood. Humans were not just killers, they were protectors. They killed with terrible efficiency because they valued life, their own and others, enough to fight for it with every weapon and tactic at their disposal. They were monsters, but they were also heroes, and the Coalition had no choice but to accept both. The Coalition Council met in emergency session 3 days after the Battle of Ridge. The chamber, usually filled with calm deliberation, now buzzed with fear and uncertainty. They had witnessed human warfare firsthand, and many wished they could unsee it. We must reconsider this alliance, declared representative of the collective. His crystalline form shimmered with agitation. The humans fight with methods we abandoned ago. They use chemical weapons, nuclear devices, and accept casualty rates that would be considered mass murder by our standards. They saved 3 million civilians, countered. Without them, those people would have been consumed by the swarm. At the cost of becoming like the swarm ourselves, asked quietly. I watched the combat recordings. I saw what they did. We asked for protectors, not butchers. The debate raged for hours. Some argued that survival justified any method. Others insisted that becoming monsters to fight monsters meant losing what made them civilized. The council was fracturing, and everyone knew it. Meanwhile, in the human section of the medical bay, Medic worked through her 3rd straight shift. The wounded from Ridge filled every available bed, moved between them, checking vital signs, administering medications, offering comfort. Her uniform was stained, her eyes red from exhaustion, but she never stopped. A young named watched work, had been rescued from Prime by his team. She had seen her family die, watched the swarm consume everything she knew. But she had also seen carry wounded civilians on his back while fighting off the swarm with his other hand. She had seen him weep over the dead even as he killed to protect the living. "Why do you do this?" asked in broken coalition standard language. "Why do humans fight so hard for strangers?" Looked up from her patient, a human soldier missing both legs. She smiled tiredly. "Because someone has to, because we know what it is to lose everything. Earth has seen disasters, wars, plagues. We know suffering. When we see others suffering, we cannot just stand by." "But you also kill so easily." "Not easily," said softly. "Never easily. Every human who kills carries that weight forever. But sometimes killing is necessary to protect life. It is a terrible truth, but it is truth nonetheless." She returned to her patient, adjusting medicine levels, speaking soothing words. Realized that humans were not monsters. They were people who had learned to do monstrous things when necessary, while still maintaining their humanity. It was a balance the coalition had never needed to learn. That evening visited the human section of the station. He found Captain in an observation lounge, staring at the stars. The captain looked tired, older somehow than he had a week ago. "Ambassador," greeted him, "I assume you are here to discuss the Council's concerns about our methods." "Your people are monsters," said. Then, before could respond, he added, "But you are our monsters now." Turned to face him fully. "We are what we needed to become to survive our world and our history. Humans did not choose to be violent. We chose to survive, and violence was the tool that worked. But we also learned mercy, compassion, and sacrifice. We are contradictions, Ambassador. We always have been. My people do not know if they can accept that." "Then they will die," said bluntly. "The swarm does not care about your moral principles. It only cares about consumption. You can either accept our help and live with the guilt of our methods, or you can maintain your purity and die civilized." The words were harsh but heard no malice in them, only sad truth. Doctor entered the lounge, a data pad in her hands. Her expression was grim. "Captain, we have completed our analysis of the swarm's behavior patterns. You need to see this." The holographic display showed the swarm's territory, a massive blob of red spreading across the sector. But at its center was a node, a focal point where all communications and coordination originated from. "A hive nexus," explained. "The swarm is not truly a hive mind in the traditional sense. It is more like a neural network with a central processor. This nexus coordinates all swarm activity within 1,000 light years." "If we destroy it," asked. "The swarm in this sector would collapse. Individual organisms would lose coordination, become easy targets. It would end the war." "Then we destroy it," said simply. "It is deep in swarm territory," continued, "surrounded by billions of organisms. Getting a ship close enough to deploy weapons would require fighting through defenses that would destroy an entire fleet. The mission would be suicide." Finished. "Yes." Silence filled the lounge, then activated his communication device. "Lieutenant Minu, report to Observation Lounge 3. Bring mission planning protocols." Within an hour had assembled his senior staff. They reviewed data, ran simulations, calculated odds. The numbers were devastating. Any ship attempting to reach the Nexus would face a 98% chance of destruction before delivering its payload. "We call it Operation," Minu said, his voice emotionless as always. "A single ship loaded with antimatter warheads. Skeleton crew to maximize speed and minimize weight. We fight through the swarm perimeter, reach the Nexus, deliver the payload, and attempt extraction." "Attempt," engineer repeated. "The odds of extraction are effectively zero." "So this is a suicide mission," said. "Yes," confirmed. The Coalition Council was horrified when they heard the plan. "We cannot allow this," said firmly. "Sending people to certain death is barbaric. It violates every principle we hold dear. Then provide an alternative, said. Give me another way to end this war that does not require sacrifice. The council had no answer. This is different from combat, argued. This is asking people to die, deliberately, with full knowledge that they will not return. Every soldier who fights knows they might die, replied. This mission simply has higher certainty, but the result is the same. We save billions of lives at the cost of a few. It is the calculus of war. We refuse to authorize this mission, declared. Find another way. Stood his expression hard. With respect, Council Prime, you asked for our help. This is what help looks like. You do not have to authorize it. We will proceed regardless. Before could respond, activated a general communication to all human personnel on the station. This is Captain. We have a mission that requires volunteers. High risk, near zero chance of survival, but success would end the war. Anyone interested, report to Briefing Room 7. Expected maybe a handful of volunteers, perhaps the most fanatical or suicidal among the humans. Within 20 minutes, over 300 humans had volunteered. Half of the human forces on the station, all willing to die for a coalition they had known for less than 2 weeks. Stood in the observation deck above the briefing room, watching them. Young and old, male and female, all with that same determined expression. Among them was Pilot, grinning despite the death sentence he had just volunteered for. Sergeant, still bandaged from Ridge, stood at attention. Even Medic was there, insisting that if people were going to die, someone should be there to ease their passing. I do not understand, whispered. Why would they do this? Had joined him in the observation deck. Because that is what humans do. We protect. We sacrifice. We die for strangers because we believe some things are worth dying for. It is the same reason we are capable of such terrible violence. We love fiercely, and we will destroy anything that threatens what we love. Below began selecting his team. Would pilot, would manage systems, would lead security. Minu would coordinate tactics. 20 personnel total, all with specific skills needed for the mission. As watched them prepare, he realized something. Humans were not monsters despite their capacity for violence. They were monsters because of their capacity for sacrifice. They could look at certain death and choose it willingly to save others. That was the most terrifying and beautiful thing he had ever witnessed. The mission would launch in 2 days. 2 days for the coalition to decide if they could live with themselves for accepting such a sacrifice. 2 days for humanity to prepare to die for strangers. Looked at, will they succeed? I do not know, she admitted. But if anyone can, it is them. Humans are very good at surviving the unsurvivable. Or dying trying, thought, and somehow that was just as human. The ship designated for operation was the Valiant, one of the 3 original vessels that had answered the Coalition's distress call. Engineer had spent 2 days stripping it down to essential systems only, removing everything that added weight. The cargo bay was filled with antimatter warheads, enough explosive power to crack a moon. Pilot ran his pre-flight checks for the 3rd time, his hands moving over the controls with practiced ease. He was young, only 25 Earth years, and had volunteered first. When asked why, he had simply shrugged and said, "Someone has to fly it, might as well be the best." Captain made his way through the ship, checking on each crew member personally. In the engineering section, was making final adjustments to the power distribution systems. Her hands were steady, but noticed the goodbye letter tucked into her uniform pocket. "Ready?" he asked. "As ready as anyone can be for a suicide mission," she replied with a grim smile. "Sir, if we do not make it back, then you will have saved billions of lives. That is enough." In the medical bay, a much smaller version than standard, Medic was organizing supplies. She had enough to treat injuries for maybe 3 hours of combat. After that, it would not matter anymore. Sergeant and his security team were in the armory, checking weapons one final time. They would be responsible for repelling any swarm organisms that managed to breach the hull. It was essentially a guarantee they would see close combat before the mission ended. On the bridge of the Bright Path stood beside Doctor, watching the preparations. The Coalition Council had ultimately decided not to stop the mission, though they had made their disapproval clear. Some called it a necessary evil, others simply called it evil. Had stayed behind, claiming her expertise was needed for analysis, but suspected the real reason. Someone needed to survive to tell humanity's story. "Are you afraid for them?" asked her. Terrified, admitted, but also proud. This is what humanity can be at its best: brave, selfless, willing to die for others. And at its worst. This is also us at our worst, she said quietly. Because we are so willing to throw lives away for victory. We have calculated the worth of 20 human lives against billions of coalition civilians and decided the math works. That calculus is both beautiful and horrible. The Valiant launched 6 hours later, 20 human souls heading into the dark to face impossible odds. The Coalition fleet positioned itself to provide long-range support, but everyone knew it was symbolic at best. Once the Valiant entered deep swarm territory, they would be alone. Watch the tactical display as the small ship accelerated toward swarm space. The first contacts came quickly. Swarm scouts, then fighters, then larger organisms. The Valiant's weapons blazed constantly, cutting through the opposition with practiced efficiency. Piloting was incredible. He wove through swarm formations like threading a needle, using the enemy's own ships as cover. When a massive swarm biocruiser tried to block their path, he accelerated directly at it, then dove under it at the last second, using its mass to shield the Valiant from other attackers. Entering dense swarm territory, his voice came over the communication channel. It was calm, steady, as if he was reporting weather conditions. Estimate 30 minutes to Nexus coordinates. But the swarm was adapting. More organisms swarmed toward the Valiant, understanding somehow that this ship was different, dangerous. The tactical display showed the Valiant as a small blue dot surrounded by an ocean of red. "Hull breach on Deck 3, reported its voice. "Sealing section. Wait, we have organisms inside. Security team to Deck 3. And his team moved to intercept. The Coalition's observation drones, pushed deep into swarm territory at great risk, caught glimpses of the fighting. Close quarters combat in narrow corridors, humans and swarm creatures locked in desperate combat. Moved through the carnage like death itself, his rifle never stopping, his movements efficient and brutal. "Nexus in sight," reported. His voice had an edge of excitement. "Approaching payload delivery range. This is going to be close." The swarm seemed to understand the threat finally. Every organism in range converged on the Valiant. The ship's shields were failing, armor cracking under sustained bombardment. Half the weapon systems were offline, but they kept going. "Engineering, I need more power to engines," demanded. "You want miracles, talk to," shot back, "but I will give you what I can." Somehow, impossibly, the Valiant broke through the final swarm defensive line. The Nexus appeared before them, a massive biological structure pulsing with bioluminescence. It was beautiful in a terrible way, like watching a storm that could kill you. "Weapon systems to manual control," ordered. "On my mark, release the payload." Time seemed to slow, could barely breathe as he watched. This was it. The moment that would determine if the Coalition survived or fell. Mark said calmly. The Valiant released its cargo, 20 antimatter warheads, each carefully targeted at structural weak points identified by Doctor's analysis. Then threw the ship into the turn of his life, burning engines past safety limits to get them away from the blast zone. The Nexus exploded. Not all at once, but in a cascading chain reaction that tore through its structure like a disease. The swarm organisms around it began convulsing, their coordinated movements becoming erratic. Across the sector, swarm forces simultaneously lost cohesion. "It worked," whispered Beside. "By the ancestors, it actually worked." But the celebration was premature. The Valiant was badly damaged, surrounded by swarm organisms that were now acting on individual instinct rather than coordinated intelligence. In some ways, that made them more dangerous, more unpredictable. "Hull breaches on multiple decks," reported, her voice strained. "Life support failing, engines at 20% capacity. Coalition fleet, this is, mission successful, Nexus destroyed. We are attempting extraction, but it is not looking good." The Coalition fleet launched every rescue ship they had, but they were too far away, and the swarm, even in its dying confusion, was still deadly. The Valiant fought its way toward friendly space, trailing atmosphere and debris. Every deck was damaged. The crew was down to 15, then 12, then 10. Medic worked frantically in the medical bay, treating wounds that would have killed most species. She pumped soldiers full of stimulants to keep them fighting, knowing she was probably killing them slowly, but buying them minutes they desperately needed. Then the engines failed completely. The Valiant drifted, helpless, as swarm organisms closed in. "This is it," said quietly. "It has been an honor." "Likewise," replied. "All hands prepare for." A massive energy discharge lit up the tactical display. Then another. Coalition warships had arrived, burning their engines to dangerous levels to reach the Valiant. They tore into the swarm organisms with a fury had never seen from Coalition forces. They had learned from the humans. They fought with purpose, with anger, with determination to save their saviors. Admiral's voice came over the fleet channel. "Valiant, this is Coalition Command. We are coming for you. Hold on." The rescue operation took 3 hours. 3 hours of sustained combat as Coalition ships formed a protective barrier around the crippled Valiant. Rescue shuttles braved swarm fire to dock with the human ship and extract survivors. In the end, 11 humans survived. 11 out of 20, barely conscious from blood loss, with both legs broken, burned across half her body, missing an arm, somehow still standing, still trying to help others despite her own injuries. 9 humans had died, but the swarm was broken. Across the sector, without the Nexus to coordinate them, swarm organisms became disorganized prey for Coalition forces. The war that had threatened to consume 7 species ended not with a whimper, but with a desperate gambit by creatures the Coalition had called monsters. 6 months later, stood in a memorial garden on the rebuilt world of Prime. The Coalition had erected a monument here, a massive structure of crystalline material that caught the light and broke it into rainbows. Inscribed on it in every Coalition language were the names of the 42 humans who had died fighting for species not their own. The inscription read, "They came when we begged, they bled when we could not, they are both our monsters and our saviors." Captain stood beside, his arm in a regenerative sling. He had recovered mostly, though the scars would never fully fade. He stared at the names of his dead, his expression unreadable. "The Coalition Council has made their decision," said quietly. "They are formally inviting humanity to join as Protectorate Guards. You would have full membership, full voting rights, and responsibility for Coalition defense. And your people can live with having monsters in their alliance. We must learn to, because the galaxy is not as peaceful as we believed. There are other threats out there, and now we know we cannot face them alone." Doctor approached from the memorial garden paths. She had been visiting other monuments, speaking with Coalition families who had lost loved ones. "The first colony ships from Earth arrived today," she reported. 2,000 colonists with more coming. We are not just protecting the Coalition anymore. We are joining it. Finally looked away from the memorial. "My people will bring both our blessings and our curses, our violence and our compassion, our weapons and our hope. Are you certain you want this? Thought about everything he had witnessed, the brutality of human warfare, the sacrifice of human soldiers, the compassion of medic, the determination of pilot, the complexity of a species that could be both destroyers and protectors. No, he admitted, but certainty is a luxury we lost when the swarm came. Now we have only choices, and choosing humanity seems better than facing the darkness alone. From the memorial garden, they could see human ships in orbit alongside coalition vessels. Two civilizations learning to coexist, brought together by desperate need and mutual sacrifice. It would not be easy. Cultural conflicts would arise. Philosophical differences would create friction, but they would face it together. Looked up at the ships above. They called us monsters. Maybe they were right, but monsters can choose what they fight for. And we choose to fight for this, for you, for the coalition, for the hope that different people can find common ground. Even if that ground is soaked in blood, asked. Especially then, said softly. Because that blood was shed willingly for strangers who became friends, there is no greater bond than that. As the sun set on Prime, casting long shadows across the memorial garden, understood something fundamental about humanity. They were not monsters despite their violence. They were not heroes despite their flaws. They were simply people who had learned to survive in a harsh universe by being both fierce and kind, brutal and compassionate, destroyers and builders. The coalition had begged the stars for help. The stars had sent them humanity. And perhaps in the end, that was exactly what they needed. Not saviors, not monsters, but fellow travelers through the dark, willing to fight, bleed, and die for something larger than themselves. The memorial's crystal caught the fading light, scattering it across the names of the dead. 42 humans who would never see Earth again. But their sacrifice had saved billions, and in doing so, had bridged the gap between species that should have been too different to coexist. As and walked away from the memorial, human and coalition personnel worked together in the gardens, planting new life in soil once consumed by the swarm. It was a simple act, but it symbolized everything they had fought for. The hope that even in a universe filled with darkness and death, life would always find a way to flourish. They had begged the stars for help. Earth's monsters had come, and in their coming they had shown that even monsters could build something beautiful.